This is Annie Scogan, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Head Over Heels Pageant Talk, and I want to thank you for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Liz Colburn, host of The Morning Uplift here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come over and check out my shows, The Morning Uplift and The Motivational Mantras. The Morning Uplift airs on Monday mornings every single week, and it's a show that really tries to help start your morning with the motivation that you need to get through your week. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Morning Uplift and Motivational Mantras. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to Wednesday, and if you're not listening to this on Wednesday, welcome to my Wednesday, because this is when I'm recording it. Wednesday, I don't think Wednesday is the worst. You know, Wednesday is called Hump Day. Everybody knows that, so I'm telling you things you don't need to know. Wednesday is called Hump Day, but I don't really think it should be called Hump Day. I think that Monday should be called Hump Day, because Mondays suck. Mondays are awful. I hate Mondays, because usually, I know some people actually have regular schedules. I know some people probably have their schedule down pat and they go to bed at specific times each night, but I hate going to bed. I do not like going to bed. I enjoy staying up at night. I just think it's more fun and I think better at night, or that's my perception. I may be totally wrong. But Wednesdays are not the worst day of the week. I think Wednesdays are pretty good days, because when you get done with Wednesday, and even when you start Wednesday, you're like, oh, I've only got Thursday and Friday left of the week. If you don't like your job, if you like your job, then whatever, it doesn't matter. Welcome to How to Write Good. This is the writing show that is not about how to write. I'm your host, Daniel Poppy. Follow me or find out more about me. You can't follow me on my website. Find out more about me at danielpoppy.com. Poppy is spelled P-O-P-P-I-E. It sounds just like the flower. It sounds just like the flower. This show is brought to you by Public House Media. So if you enjoy this show, go over to Facebook, find Public House Media on Facebook and like this show. And if you do not enjoy the show, go to Facebook, find Public House Media and like the show. If you do like the show, I keep on repeating myself because that's just how it is when you do these things. If you do like this show, please like and share the posts that are put up by the show. Like and share the every week when it comes up. And I hope to get some other stuff up to entertain you, because really, in the end, if you're not entertained by this show, if you don't find pleasure in listening to it, you really shouldn't, because I need to do a better job if it's the case. For those of you who have been around since the first episode, which hasn't been that many episodes, I don't know why you're still here. I really don't, because this is kind of, for Public House, there's a lot of other podcasts that are good, and you should really check out those shows rather than this one. And really, like, you're listening to a show about writing. You're listening to a show about the philosophy of writing and literature and language and different things like that. That's really a niche market. I don't know. And the one of the reasons why I made this is because when I bring up stuff like this up like this in conversations, I always feel like I'm talking to a brick wall, and it always seems like people are extremely bored. So maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe people actually enjoy talking about these things, but they just hide them. I don't know. I don't know why you're still here. It might be you may just like pain in your life, okay? Because you need to find a better hobby than listening to me, probably, if you are. Just saying. I know that my mother listens to this show. I call her my mother, not mom. We don't call her mom in our household, or it's not my household anymore, but we don't call her mom. We call her mother. And I know my mom listens to this show, but moms have to listen to their kids' stuff if a kid puts something out like this. And mothers have to like their kids' awful artwork and the things they put up. And I bet she does enjoy the show. Hey, Mom, how's it going? I bet she does. But in reality, if she was really objective, she's not objective. Mothers aren't objective in relation to their children. I don't believe it. I don't believe it one bit. If she was objective, she would probably not listen to it. So for those of you who are still here, thank you for being here. And we will continue on to our word of the week, because, as I say every week, we've got a vocabulary. We have a collective vocabulary of about 100 words. And we're trying to build that vocabulary up by the end of this year to like 105 words. We have two words this week, 2 words of the week. And I have these 2 words, and you'll probably figure it out as I am saying them. But they are winter themed. Last week I had a word that meant cold, and it was cold outside. It suddenly got cold. It was suddenly in the teens because I live in the tundra of Wisconsin. It suddenly got cold, and I'm like, oh, my word means cold. It means like freezing or something like that. It was gelid. That was the word, if you can't remember it. So we are going to do a winter theme all up until Christmas, and maybe we'll have a Christmas word when we hit like the week of Christmas, because you really shouldn't celebrate Christmas until the week of Christmas. Otherwise, you're making the celebration of Christmas shallow. Okay? So you should wait until about the week, and you should get everything ready in that week. So the words of this week are algefacient and algid. And if you are sharp, as I am, you probably noticed that they sound similar. And I did not look this up, so you can't take my word on this, but I'm almost certain they come from the same root word, because they mean very similar things, and they look very similar. They sound very similar. Algefacient means coolant. So Freon in an air conditioner would be considered an algefacient, and algid means cool. And I am wondering right now, and I didn't look this up either. I should have looked it up, but maybe I'll get to it next week. But I wonder if gelid is connected to those. Gelid was our last week word. Gelid's kind of an ugly word if you think about it. But I wonder if gelid is actually connected. It's actually related. It had the same etymology as these 2 words. So I'm going to maybe look that up for myself. I may remember that to share that with you. If I don't, you'll just have to look it up for yourself as well. Sometime today, I was thinking that sometime I'm going to find different words, and for like 10 weeks straight, I'm going to have words that are just related, because I think that'd be pretty cool. Because if you ever have a chance, and if you have the ability to find pleasure in it, you should check out the History of English podcast, because it's really, really interesting. Now, it's completely different. It's the exact opposite of how I do this podcast, because the guy who does it, he's very level in how he talks, and he's a bit monotone, but the stuff is super fascinating. And it goes into history itself, and it talks about stuff like that. And I think it's great. And even though it is really dry in how it's done, and you can clearly tell, well, I mean, I guess I have a show map here, but you're almost certain he has some sort of script as he's going through it, I think. Maybe he doesn't. But I think it's super interesting, and there's so many words you run into. You're like, whoa, these are related? That's bizarre. Because they're completely different words now, and you can see it. Once you know it, it becomes clear to you. One thing that I've more and more started to do in my life, I mean, since high school probably, maybe not in high school, but I've tried to start looking for connections between words, and it's become a second nature to be like, oh, those 2 words seem like they're connected. So if you do have more of an interest in language, like a really big interest in language, like an obsession with language, you should check out the History of English podcast, because I think it's fun. I think going back to what I was talking about with a niche market in terms of this podcast, when I was making this, I'm like, man, this is such a niche market. Like, who's really going to want to listen to something like this? It doesn't exist. There's no other well, there may be a podcast that does the same thing as this one, or something similar, or has the same content, but I couldn't find one. It must be a pretty small podcast, maybe as small as this one. But when I was thinking about it, I'm like, no way, people don't want to listen to this. But I guess there's at least like 3 of you. My mom doesn't count. My mom doesn't count into that. All right, today for our accidental essence, we are talking about why your kids' art sucks. If you have children, we are going to talk about why your children's art is not good art. And you as a parent can completely disagree with me, because when I have kids and I see my kids' art, part of me will be like, well, that art isn't very good. But the other part of me will be like, this kid is a genius, because that's just how it is. I'm going to be completely biased on the side of my children, except when they're doing things that are bad. But if they want to try something, I'm probably going to be really biased on their side in terms of them like going out of their comfort zone and trying things. And then once they do something wrong, I'm going to let the hammer down. Of course, I will see how that goes once I have children. We are talking, more specifically, we're talking about why our kids' art sucks. And by we, I mean me, because I always have to say we for some reason. It's a weird part of how I talk. We're talking about imagination versus creativity. And I'm just going to use a couple dictionary definitions because I know that dictionary definitions are the most entertaining thing in the world, and people want to just read the dictionary like me because I want to read the dictionary and I want to know definitions. So I think that you want to know definitions as well. So imagination and creativity, some dictionaries make them synonymous, meaning that you'll find in the synonyms, it's essentially one means the other. So imagination and creativity mean the exact same thing, and I don't think they should, because we have two different words for them. Why do we have two different words for two things, or the same exact thing, like exactly the same thing? I think that if we have two words that mean the exact same thing, we should use one of the words, we should just chuck the other one and not use it. Use the one that sounds better and chuck the other one. But a lot of dictionaries, the dictionary that I was looking at, have different definitions for these words, and it's pretty clear what the difference is. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And we'll get to why your kids' art sucks eventually, but not immediately. So imagination is defined as the faculty forming mental images not prevalent to the senses, otherwise known as the mind's eye. So it's the ability to see things or imagine things that are not prevalent to your senses. So if you could somehow imagine a taste on your tongue, that's technically imagination. You might also be hallucinating. There are hallucinations where you actually taste things. You might also be hallucinating, but this is the ability to see things or imagine things, to picture something that's not actually there. Pretty clear. I call it the mind's eye. I think it's easier to say mind's eye, and it makes more sense. No, it doesn't make more sense. It just evokes an image. It evokes something you're doing. Creativity, on the other hand, by the same dictionary. I'm not pulling two different dictionaries right here. I'm using the same one. Creativity, as defined by this specific dictionary, because there's a lot of different things about it, the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, etc., to create meaningful new ideas, forms, and interpretations. And some of you may be saying, well, in some dictionaries, they mean the exact same thing. So why shouldn't we just have them mean the exact same thing? I don't think that's really useful. Like I was saying before, if we have two different words, I think that we should have them defined differently, at least a little bit. Like if there's two words and they're almost the exact same thing, but they're not the exact same thing, there's a reason for having those two words still. And some of you may be saying, why are you splitting hairs about the words? And why are you splitting hairs about what the words mean? And I say back to that I think this whole entire podcast is about splitting hairs over stuff. So why are you here? All right. So children, going back to why your children suck, why your kids' art sucks. Your children don't stink. Their art is bad. I'm insulting their art, not them. Okay? So, and if I sniff a little bit, I have a cold. I'm at the end of a cold, and I'm trying to do my best not to sniffle. It's really, really hard. If you get some noises in there, it's tough. So, children are seen as being more creative than adults, and I think this is a bunch of crap. Because I don't think children are more creative than adults. I think children are more imaginative than adults. And, okay, so let me go back. So children, we think children are more creative, and there's even quotes by famous people. I don't know who made up the quote. They're like, oh, if you look at a kid, they're interested in all these different things. They're interested in science. They want to ask all these questions and different things like that. And then when you go to and talk to someone who is older, who's in high school, they're not interested in anything at all. And I don't remember who said this. I'll find the quote maybe eventually. I'm just coming up with this now. I didn't have it in my show plan. So I'm just coming off the top of my head. I'm not gonna do the research in the middle and just pause the show. But I think that's completely wrong. First of all, because kids ask a lot of questions, especially when they're younger, but teenagers are really interested in a lot of things. If you aren't around teenagers, you think they're bored about school. And they may be really bored during school, likely due to a lot of busy work in school, or they just don't think the stuff in school is interesting or some other reason. Maybe they don't like their teacher. But I think teenagers they're interested in a lot of different things, and they want to explore a lot of different things. And I think it's the same with adults too. And you may say, well, that doesn't like really jive with what I see. I don't think adults display as much creativity as children. But going back, I don't think children display a lot of creativity. And the reason why I don't think children display a lot of creativity goes back to that definition. This is why I started with that definition. Because creativity is the ability to transcend what we think as the norm to create something that is different and unique. And I don't think children generally have the mental capacity to do that. What children are doing, what I believe children are doing, is displaying imagination. They are able to picture things in their mind's eye that aren't present, and you see them acting out things in their mind's eye. I will give an anecdote from my own life. As a kid, I didn't usually make stuff up by myself. I brought stuff together that I knew from different areas. So my family really liked Lord of the Rings. And with that, if you want to play as a kid, you imagine you're in Lord of the Rings. I wasn't making a completely new world. When I was doing that, I was taking someone else's world, someone who had been creative, and I was imagining that. I was imagining that I was in that world. So I think children generally display a lot of imagination. I don't think they generally display a lot of creativity. But you might also say, well, if you think adults are more aren't kids more creative anyways, because they're still coming up with different ways to do things. So if a kid makes art, they aren't bound by social rules. They're going they're going on different avenues that someone wouldn't typically make. And I would say, no, I don't really think they are. I think they aren't capable of conveying what they're trying to convey. So if a kid makes the best part about this, okay, I'm going to take a little sidetrack. There is a website, and this is what this episode title is based off of. It's called Your Kid's Art Sucks. It has a little bit of language, but all the website is about this guy who takes kids' art and he insults it. And it is super funny because it's not serious. He's not seriously insulting it. He's just, it's a mockery of someone who would insult something like that. And people actually take him seriously. I don't know if it's he or her. I don't know. People actually take this individual seriously, and they get so mad about the person insulting the kid's art. They're like, oh, it's just a kid. And it's just like, relax. The person doesn't the kid's art is bad. Kids make bad art because they're kids, but he's making a mockery of it because people are always like, oh, my kid's art is so good. And then he's applying what would be an adult's perspective. So if an adult made that art, I would say that's the worst art in the world. And you would too. Your kid's art is bad, but they're kids, so it's okay. But going back to it, I was saying how the kids are not trying to create something new when they create art. They're just trying to represent the world around them. If you look at kids' art, look at how they draw people. They never draw things that are, if they draw something abstract, it's usually not abstract. My nephew, my parents have a picture of a tractor my nephews drew. One of them is a little older. One of them is a little younger. They both drew tractors. One of them looks like a tractor. One of the pictures looks like a tractor, not one of my nephews. One of my nephew's pictures looks like a tractor. The other one doesn't look like anything, but he was still trying to make a tractor, so good for him. Good for him because he was still trying to make a tractor. Kudos on him. He will be able to make the best tractor in the world in like 10 years. Maybe not 10 years. But kids are trying to represent the world around them when they make art. They're not trying to be unique. They're not trying to break traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, and so on to make something new. They're just trying to represent the world around them. And the fact that the only reason it looks like they're trying to do that is because they're so bad at doing it. And the reason why they're so bad at doing it is because they're they're young. And I don't really think you get good at anything. Most people don't get really good at anything until they become an adult. So what does the work of something, if kids aren't creative, why aren't adults creative? And I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, no, adults are creative. A lot of adults are doing a lot of different things. I myself am making this podcast. I know a guy, I was talking to him this past weekend, and he builds a lot of stuff with woodwork. I lived with a guy who built a lot of stuff with woodwork. That was his hobby. He didn't have a lot of time to do it, but he did it. I know another guy who put out an album recently, and there's a lot of people I know who write. There's a lot of people who write, who are interested in writing, who are interested in art, and people who are adults, they do display a lot of creativity. They want to make a lot of different things. It might not look like art. It might be in a different area besides art, but are they looking at things from a different perspective? Are they transcending traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, and trying to create something different? And the big word in here for this definition of creativity is that the thing is meaningful. It actually means something. And it makes sense that adults are more creative than children because they think on more of an abstract level. They are able to see things from more perspectives because, first of all, their brains are more fully developed. Second of all, they have more experience. And if you take time to think as an adult, you have more time to think about stuff, and you can read better. You can analyze an argument better than a child. Generally, there may be an adult that can't, and there may be a child that is a genius, but I'm talking in generalities right now. And in general, adults can do these things a lot better, and they are more capable at being creative than kids. Your kids are not creative. Your kids are really good at imagining things, but adults generally don't need to imagine things as much, and they generally don't have as much time. That's another thing I was going to point out. Someone may say, oh, adults never display creativity, or they don't do it a lot, or teens never do. Teens, I think, do a lot. I think teens do a lot, and the reason why I think they do it a lot is because they are thinking more abstractly, and they have tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of time. You have tons of time generally if you're a teenager, and then when you become an adult, you actually have real responsibilities, and you don't have as much time to be creative because you've got to do stuff that isn't creative so you don't starve. That's just how it is. Now, going back to what I was talking about last week, a lot of people see creativity. They're people who are creative. There's something special about them, and I don't buy it. Even there's research, I guess, showing that creativity is like a character trait. You have to have like a certain level of intelligence, of creativity. You don't have to be a super genius to be creative. It's just a matter of like a level of intelligence, and it's a character trait. And supposedly people are there's not tons and tons of people who are creative, but I don't know about that. I don't know if I agree with that, and I part of me thinks that there's gonna, once they research it more and they maybe it's how they define creativity. Maybe they define it in a very narrow way, and if you define something in a really narrow way, you're going to see less of it in the population. But I think that if I describe my process of creativity, you'll probably say, yeah, I do that in a lot of ways in my own life. My wife is a person who's always usually said, I'm not really creative, but then she starts to make stuff. And if she's given parameters for what she needs to make, she does a really, really good job. And it's a really cool stuff she makes. It's done really well. But my process for creativity, and I think that most people go through this process, it's not as if a muse just like lights on your head and you suddenly can suddenly write a poem or write music or anything like that. I think there are times when you're in a really good mood, and it goes back to that idea of flow. I think I talked about flow in another episode where everything's really, really smooth and you just are connected. And when people think they have a muse on them, it's usually that they're really engaged in what they're doing and they're hyper-focused on what they're doing, so they're able to do it better. But for me, for the daily grind of trying to create something that's good, trying to make something that does turn away from the regular way of doing things that's unique, I usually compile ideas, tons and tons and tons of ideas, and then I go through those ideas and I pick. I'm like, I don't like this idea, I like this idea, and I slowly narrow it down until I get to the idea that I really, really like. I'm like, this is the idea, this is the best idea that I can find. So I think creativity, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of different choices you can make about how to do something. So if you're writing music, there's a lot of different notes you can use. Well, there's a lot of different notes you can use, not tons and tons, but there's quite a few ways you can arrange those notes. There's probably an infinite amount of ways you can arrange those notes. And there's the best way to do it. How are you going to convey the emotion inside of yourself in the best way to do that? And I think it's the same way for writing. There's a lot of different ways to write something. When I'm writing a single sentence, there's a lot of different combinations of words I can use to create those sentences, but I have to make the best choice to make that sentence come across in a way that best conveys the emotion I'm trying to get across to the reader and the ideas I'm trying to get across to the reader. So it really depends on whether I'm trying to convey emotion, ideas, whether I'm trying to make someone see or feel or hear something that's going on in the book, whether I want to be really tangible, like have words that evoke senses in the book or something like that. And you're trying to make something really unique. So you've got to sort through it, and you've got to pick the best thing. So I think it's really a matter of how you choose what you're doing. And somebody may disagree with me on this. I think a couple months ago, 3 months ago, maybe more than a couple months ago, I had a conversation with a friend, and I explained what I was thinking about, like the process of creativity. We were on different wavelengths, but he seemed to agree with me on this. Maybe he didn't. You can always tell me if you didn't, if you're listening to this podcast. But he went back to the creativity, so that was the process of creativity. And creativity itself, how he defined it was very much, very, very close to how the dictionary defined it. So it was a way of doing things that went away from the norm, that did something in a newer way. So it was kind of like a paradigm shift. So the person who is creative in his mind was looking at things and trying to start from a different paradigm and be creative in that way. So one thing, if you're not a creative person, before we go into the logical fallacy of the week, if you're not a creative person, there is research that shows that if a person looks at creativity or making something, so typically creativity involves making something, or it looks like making something. For me, I write. For someone else, they make music. For someone else, they may paint or draw, or maybe do woodworking, or maybe it is how you arrange a room. I would say that someone who goes into a room and they see a room and they're like, man, like, how can I best utilize this space? How can I make this space feel a specific way? How can I make this space evoke a specific mood in me so I can use it for a specific purpose? If you've never heard of Jordan Peterson before, you should look him up because he's a psychologist, and there's controversy going on around him in terms of free speech up in Canada. But he specifically talks about, I've heard him talk about arranging a room in a specific way to be used for a specific purpose, and how you should look at every little piece of a room and you should think about the best way to do it and set it up in that way, and keep on experimenting until you get the right way to set up the room. Because a room, if you set it up in a certain way, it can the value of that room, the little amount that it can help you, compounds over time, and it really helps you in the long run. So it's one view of setting up a room, but my wife, again, going back to her, she can look at a room and she can set it up in a way that is really, really good. So every room in our house looks really good because she sets it up. I'm not the one who arranges the rooms, because I would just be like, throw it in the middle of the room. Throw the couch in the middle of the room. It doesn't matter. It's fine. But if you look at creative problems, if you look at creating something as a problem to solve rather than a thing to make, if you're looking at it, you're like, okay, I'm setting up a problem for myself to solve, and you're not like, I have to create this thing. There's research that shows, going back to the Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, that guy with the flow, there's research that he has done that shows that it actually brings about better results than someone just making something. So maybe if you're not creative, try looking at things like a problem to solve, and it might actually help you be creative. I don't know. Maybe the research is right, and maybe it's the case that creativity is a personality trait. I think that people have the capability of changing how they do things a lot, because I've done it in my own life, and I think you do too. Like, you can look at your life, you can be like, what do I want to change? You can take steps toward changing it, and you can be a completely different person in 5 years. In a lot of you'll still be you, but there will be so many things that change about you. So the logical fallacy of this week is shifting the burden of proof, or onus probandi. I think that's how you say it. onus probandi, or shifting the burden of proof. So in a logical argument, there's typically someone arguing for something. So if you are arguing for something, it is your responsibility for giving a person a reason for why they should believe you. Just being like, this is my proof, holding it out in front of them, so to speak. If you are shifting the burden of proof, which is a logical fallacy, it is saying, I do not need to prove my claim. You must prove my claim false. Okay? So if you're saying that to anyone, if you're saying, oh, you need to prove my claim false, that's wrong. You actually do need to prove your claim. So that is our logical fallacy of the week. Before I wrap up, I just saw, I was just in a class today and somebody was reading Fahrenheit 451, and I was just thinking about how that book is usually seen as a book about censorship. What most people don't know is that Ray Bradbury, like when the television was coming out and becoming prominent, did not like the television. He actually wrote that book about TV, and he wrote the book about how TV destroys people's interest in literature, and it kind of just makes them. I'm going to read a quote of you. This will pretty much cement why, like, I'm supporting my idea with this quote. This is a quote from Ray Bradbury. The television, that insidious beast, that Medusa, which freezes 1 billion people to stone every night staring fixedly, that siren, which called and sang and promised so much and gave so little. So he was not a fan of the TV, and he wrote a book about it, which is Fahrenheit 451. And the funny thing about it is that some people today, I was reading an article about it, and someone's like, well, like, people said that TV was going to destroy the film industry. And I'm like, but it did destroy the film industry. Have you ever seen Netflix? Maybe it's because the film industry is so bad now. But Netflix, I think, kind of destroyed the film industry because it's really cheap. You get tons and tons and tons of really good TV. And it's film quality TV. It's gotten to the point where the TV is film quality. But I've just been thinking about how TV actually affects us. And I think he may be right. To a certain degree, it does wreck our interest in literature because it changes how we think. And it changes how we think by making our attention spans they're shorter. It makes them a lot shorter, I think. It's just TV involves no investment of your mind in a lot of ways, unless I like TV that it really requires me to watch it. But in a lot of cases, you can just watch the TV and do something else. In most cases, I usually am doing something else while I watch TV unless I'm really tired. But reading, I can't read and do something else at the same time. There's likely to be somebody like that, but not me. So that is all I've got for this week. My name is Daniel Poppy. I will see you next week on How to Write Good. Your kids' art sucks.